I just have to watch it. Tell me what time it is. I just have the power with a hair on it. So, I don't know. I'm going to give you options. I want more. This was okay. I want I just opened this up and the first thing is gorgeous. Gorgeous connectivity. Sorry, can you tell us what that line today? Which we know. Like, that's amazing. You're like, that's like perfect. That's you. Wait. Hey, how are you?
I can move. I can move here and you can
I think it'll go more after let me see if I can get
I'm feeling
it was like hours for like 5 miles, but then in like 15 I think they don't pay 2 hours of travel. Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Because I mentioned everybody's attention for a second, we're going to get started. I'm Anna. I work in movement research. Thank you so much for being here at the Studies Project. These are monthly artist-instigated discussions, and they happen here at Gidney, usually every first Tuesday of the month. So we also are open to proposals. So if there's something you want to bring to movement research to talk about, send us an email, talk to us after this, something like that. We want to thank Gidney for letting us be in this huge, big studio. We needed it today, apparently. And we are live streaming and audio recording, just so you guys know. So if there is something that you personally say during it that you feel super uncomfortable with, you can come talk to me or Levi, who just went over there at the end, and we can strike it from the record. The elevator in this space does stop running at 8 p.m. So at 7:45, we'll do a little announcement if you guys need to use the elevator to leave. There are stairs you can use, but there are many of them. We do have a merch table set up, so afterwards, if you want to check it out, forms, journals, tote bags, all kinds of good things. And this is a free event, and if you're able to throw a couple dollars in the bag on your way out, we'd super appreciated to keep these kind of programs going.
One other note related to the topic of this class is we do have a new series of classes at the Giving Performance
Performing Arts Center.
Performing Arts Center at 280 Broadway. There's somatic-based classes, so some of these people are teaching them. Alexander Technique, Qigong, welding, Gries, body-mind centering, etc. Contact improvisation. It's a brand new series. It's in our new calendar, the blue calendar, so please check it out. We really want to support these teachers in this program moving forward. So this studies project has been a long time in coming. I feel like I've had so many conversations with a lot of our teaching artists, mostly through the movement research, faculty meetings, but also individual conversations with lots of teaching artists and students and choreographers about, the constantly shifting role of class. And this has taken on many forms or many sort of threads, often parallel, overlapping threads. Big issue is often for students, the economics of class, as the economic situation in New York has shifted since I've been here. The ability of dance artists to take class, to free up their schedule, to pay for that, to make time for that has become harder and harder. And as work has changed and morphed, there's been questioning of what is the role of class? What kind of tools can it serve as a contemporary artist as work continues to evolve in the many directions that it evolves in. So this was just a way to sort of frame some of the many issues or start a conversation around a lot of the issues that we've been talking about with many of these people and many of you all over the past several years about the role of practice, the role of class in this forum. I invited some people I'd had some really strong conversations with. We're here to help me kind of brainstorm this event, and they came up with this amazing, very large-scale experimental approach to sort of jump-starting this conversation. And I think we really are interested in this being the start of a conversation. It's such a vast topic. We talked about this, that there's no way we can really come to any sort of solid conclusions about it in an hour and a half. So this is really a chance to kickstart multiple conversations and hopefully lead to various follow-up conversations, projects, ideas. That's what we're hoping. Another really big part of this for me is something Lance brought up in a faculty meeting about the lack of sort of documentation or archiving of all of these embodied teaching practices that have been going on in New York City for the last 30, 40 years. But there's not real a record of the depth or just to put those, all of that work that is really embodied and passes on from body to body and orally in these classroom practice spaces to sort of figure out how to present that to the world. And in a way that's not reductive or hierarchical, but really about the multiplicity of voices that are participating in these conversations in this work. So, not too ambitious, just thought we'd try and do that. Gwen will explain the structure of the event. I just wanted to point out, we have this butcher paper up on the walls, and that's for you guys to use if anything comes up during the discussion and you want to write down a thought. There's some Post-its there, markers, pencils. I put some here. If you really don't want to leave your seat, maybe you can raise your hand. I asked Lily, who's one of our lovely interns there, and she can grab a Post-it and pen and bring it over to you. And we're hoping as the event progresses, you can kind of post your thoughts on that wall, and we'll hold on to them at the end of the event as sort of an archive, another archive for us to kind of continue with these conversations moving forward. So I think that's, go and get ready. Get ready. So let's just get started since we're already commencing. So Gwen can introduce the.
I think I'm going to stand here because I feel a little bit more like I'm in part of the circle, and I think with that in mind, even though we have an initial set of, we're calling them pods, speakers, everyone will be participating tonight, so I think I just wanted to start that off. The structure of the evening is initially we've broken down into groups, 4 topics. And we're kind of like timed improvisations or timed events. Discussions will happen about 8 o'clock. I'm going to bring out my cell phone, and at 7 minutes, the timer's going to go off, and you just take a few seconds to trickle off and end your conversation. We'll move on to the next one. Everyone listening in, next one, and next one. At the end of that series of little kind of mini conversations, which will obviously already go through many, many ideas. At the end of that, we'll stop and I'll ask you to go and we'll move. Your group might come over here, and we'll become 4 groups, larger groups, and they'll just keep on going. So the funny part of it is that we kind of turn the conversation off at a certain point and move on. But our interest was to listen to as many ideas, so we all in the room get a chance to hear what's happening surrounding this topic. At the end, again, at the end of the 4 pods, the continued larger group discussions will be 20 minutes. And then again, we'll do this kind of time stop, and we'll go into a full group discussion. Like any structure, it may end up happening differently than I just described. I think we all know that as teachers and dance makers, so we'll see where we land. To get going,
Just mention one other thing. We're not going to do a formal introduction for all these people because that would be the host of the project. So we're just asking everyone to kind of include your history, your bio, your background, your experience as part of the conversation. Is that also interested in that lineage, that personal narrative, that's that teaching practice?
so I thought we would just spend, and to start off this timing, we're going to do a
did Trisha teach, and she didn't. So that started me thinking on the fact that we don't always have to go to a class in order to learn how to dance. We can osmose it through our bodies, and we can learn dancing through dancing, which became a big driving force for my own teaching.
And we just started trying to create these talking points, which we started to call prompts. And as I was going back through them, deciding like which for me would be, after lots of, I re-edited them and rewrote them many times, but which would still really call me to speak about it. One thing I realized, without really talking about the economics of class, none of these others are possible. Which I was like, wow, it's like, I'd love to talk about the more theoretical aspects of class and all the other kind of things, but without the economics of class, without me being able to teach a class for an economical reason, it's hard to consider the other questions.
Yeah, that felt like a common experience when we were initially brainstorming, that to try and unpuzzle like any one subject matter felt really impossible a lot of the time. And I think that was one of the reasons for just going with like just trying to kind of allow for raising lots of issues.
I think the discussion also allowed me to go through the decades of time I've either been taking class or observing other people's classes or teaching my own classes, and to really review that and feel that in the group as well. I think you'll find that in your group, the small generational differences and in just how you're approaching the material, and that was so.
We got into discussions about traditions and community of class, and I just remember being like one person in New York. So where did you take class today? It was just so important, people were on it. We were almost competitive, like how many classes did you take this week? I remember that very distinctly in terms of developing both the community of people around me as a young dancer and creating a really technical base.
And in terms of generations, when I was dancing with Trisha, it wasn't really about taking classes. It was about what do you do for yourself and how do you do it for yourself.
I made a joke with Carolyn and other
We have
people.
to talk that, right?
Yeah,
In general, we have to talk that.
Like how many hours?
So we're doing this so that you guys can learn as we go down. Yeah, so you have to talk really loud. Okay.
No, not necessarily in class. I was trying to get how many hours did you spend on your back? It was really kind of a.
Which is a marked difference in terms of how Beth has gone about her career, and I enjoyed that, thinking about that and listening to that, those stories.
Yeah. Yeah, and I wonder actually just to kind of, physical practice is definitely important to me, and I am working on that, but so it's taken different forms than going to class. And currently right now it takes the shape of Pilates and gyrotonics,
So there's an example of how we'll just be, the fairy will come in and
Really quickly, I would just like to read the prompts.
Sure.
Okay. Really quickly, these are the kind of basic prompts or topics that we landed on. The economics of class and how to consider the practicalities of a dancer's professional and personal life. Consider the models of organizational support and how they served obstacles for both student and teacher, not just students, but the second prompt is the different roles and expectations and functions of class, technical refinement, physical training, artistic research, all the different expectations that people have. Different evolving structures in class, which could be combining traditional structures and experimental structures. Trends in performance and how the trends in performance these days are influencing class and how people take class. And also finally, class in New York in relationship to classes in other parts of the world. So these separate groups might start with a topic and might meander quite loosely between these topics.
Would you like to begin? And yeah, if you want to move in a circle, if you want to move your pod in a little bit so we can hear you, I think that we'll figure this out as we go.
And say your names. Something.
I'm KJ Holmes, and we're talking about different roles, expectations, and functions of class. And one of the things I just wrote down that as a teacher, I continue my own artistic research, and I learn through teaching. So that as a teacher, I'm not stopping to teach what I know. So as an artist, I'm teaching to continue to learn. And my students who have changed over many years, and some of them still come, but then there's always a new group of students, continue to inform me about what I'm learning and how to apply what I'm learning. So that's something I was thinking about, that it's not like I'm teaching a dead art, which I think dance, one of the things about dance is that it is a living art and it continues to grow and evolve as we do. That's something.
I want to, hi, I'm Jesse Zarrett. I wanted to jump off something I love actually, KJ, the teaching to continue to learn, and I think that's why I've been so attracted to your teaching and inspired by it. And one thing that kind of connects me to this idea is that my students are sort of they're still in school largely. I teach at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia and at ADF down south. And those students are coming to me with a kind of hunger for movement and information, and I struggle with my interests as an artist, which in a way are moving towards like ideas of like ethics and participation and what is citizenship, and how those things are in relationship to a moving body, and less about like, can you do that thing? But I feel like when I get into the room with my students, there's that hunger for that thing. And so I am learning from them. I am learning from those students, like how to find a way to talk about both of it, or how to find a way to move through like the things that circulate, that have a kind of currency, and these other questions.
I feel like I can build off of both of those. My name's Corinne Keithley-Sires, and I've had a kind of orbit away from dance and back to dance. And my initial relationship to class was as a student and teacher in the sort of mid and late 90s, when release technique was the sort of, or release was the sort of charm word, right, for this way into something that would be the clue to a certain kind of clarity or power in dancing. And I drifted away from that and ended up many years later studying American intellectual history and looking at pragmatist philosophers like William James and John Dewey, who are interested in how one creates a scene of continuous education, how one creates an open, mobile, intelligent democracy that's capable of responding to an unknown world and process. And I was immediately just bombarded with recollections of my experience in dance class. And even in dance class, like doing those things, like having the experience of power and clarity that belongs to technique, as well as the more sort of freaky-deaky fringes, which I now favor. And so I've been working on this orbit of asking, first of all, can this scene of exploration be a resource for understanding what non-dualism really means, or what it really means to try to philosophically embrace a non-anthropocentric worldview where we understand ourselves as part of the material of the world, and not as these sort of minds on top of bodies, but as these mindful bodies. And then conversely, I'm now just at the very beginning of trying to ask whether those articulations of those same questions that belong to a philosophical literature might be useful for generating class structures. And to me, that's a very open question, and I have no idea how oblique or direct the answer is.
I'm Roseanne Spradlin, and I'm I guess my identity is foremost as a choreographer, but also maybe in the body-mind centering material, because that's something that I studied for many years. It feels like many lifetimes almost. And from the body-mind centering material, I mean, I'm looking at the paper, I see two things that pop out at me in this little section. One, theoretical research, because definitely that work really is a lot about the theory of body and mind and how people can move and how they can be. And then the other one that's really big that maybe people don't know so much about is the community experience. My class in body mind centering had 100 people in it. So every time we met, there were about 120 people in the room, because there were 100 students and probably 20 teachers. One main teacher, Bonnie, who taught almost every single thing, but there was always a cadre of teachers who followed her around. And then, were we in the same class? No, you were my teacher. I was your teacher. But that community experience was so incredibly wild. Like, I've never gotten over it in a way. I mean, it was so deep, it was so wild, it was so transformative for me. And I feel like that's something I really miss, and I wish we could have that more somehow in our community. But when I teach body-mind centering here, I don't do it that much anymore because that community part of it actually never formed. And I think that's just partly because people cannot make that kind of commitment. It seems like, to come back to the same class day after day, not just once a week. That somehow the chemistry doesn't happen when you do it once a week. I know Daria and I were talking about that, like how hard it is to teach these so-called somatic classes when they meet once a week. It just really is not the right format somehow, and yet that's the form that we've given it this tiny little place of in our community right now, and so grateful to have it, but still somehow it doesn't create the mind, it doesn't create the place for real transformation to happen. So it's still possible.
Well, I think that like the idea of a living art form doesn't exclude the history, and that in some ways the drop-in class format continues to kind of keep everything so current that we forget that we are developing each time we take a class. And as a teacher, I wonder, like, when people come in once or occasionally, how are they actually applying what I'm teaching in my class, but to other things? And my interest is how to see it applied across to other people's work. How I might join, like Corinne and I are going to co-teach a class with some of the things that she was talking about. So, how is it that we do draw from the knowledge of the material body into the idea of what we want to be making when we don't even know what that is, and how do we feel about that? When do we have time to drop in to feel about it, because we're moving around so much? So something about that exchange.
I feel like it has something to do with like the time in your life when you make space for class, however accidental that is. Maybe it's this traditional time when you move to New York and for the first 3 years or whenever you're there. But just the intensity of that season of experience that I've felt, I've been astonished by how strong some of the earliest and most sustained scenes of my own dance education have been in terms of my own thinking, and the idea that those become sort of archives or resources for our thinking as we go through these more diffuse, unhappily less communal times has been sort of sustaining for me.
But I was just thinking about, like, I had these epiphanic moments in, like, when Corinne was my teacher in 2000, And then when KJ was my teacher more recently, like these epiphanic moments that actually do build one on top of the other. Like when I sit here, I remember that, like we were doing this thing across the floor. And so that sense of accumulation, and also there's something about a kind of community that feels like it's getting more dispersed, but somehow, I know we have to finish, but there's that weird thing about time. In our dancing lives, where it's not. My life feels more. I think about time more like this than like that. I guess. Like about that concentration.
Lot, and that takes from a lot of traditional Chinese medicine and Eastern practices, but also like quantum physics and Western medicine. It has really mentioned what is a global body, and what do we really have in common with other places, and what are the value systems that I also be receptive to the other value systems that are in the room. I'll start there.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Just in terms of the political ramifications of being an American artist teaching abroad, teaching in New York. what aspect of?
I do in terms of we like the thing I teach most in New York is a movement practice class, and it feels like in that
say New York is one of the easiest places to teach in, and movement research in particular, because you go in with an idea and everyone's like, blah, blah, blah. Like, I think there's a really incredible culture that movement research has created. But so I think that feels like the political nature of class, that we are taking this 2 hours out of our day to listen and to let things move when culture is trying to confine us.
My name is Julian Barnett, and we were talking earlier just about these things naturally. And for me, I sort of empathize with Beth and Jesse and Corinne a bit in terms of kind of deviating from my teaching practice. I used to teach quite a bit in New York, and I haven't really been teaching that often so much now, primarily focusing on a choreographic practice. But the irony is that I've been teaching quite a bit in Europe. And the main takeaway and it's hard to not speak in generalizations, but from my experience, I feel like I think it's related to history, because in New York, there is this history that's in my body and in my rhetoric even. But in Europe, I feel as though I can build a new history, or I can sort of start from scratch on a daily level. And there's more malleability in terms of what I teach. Granted, I think because of the context or the specific reasons why I'm teaching versus New York, I've experienced a much more comfortable sort of energy or comfortable investigation through teaching when I have more autonomy over, when I'm sharing a choreographic practice versus fulfilling a type of technical expectation, which has been sort of the past. I know this sort of deviates into the expectations of class, but we were talking about how that is also related to, politics or history, and coming and teaching in Europe, for example, I can sort of be zero, I can be neutral, and I haven't quite experienced that here yet.
Okay. My name is Tzvi Goldiner. I'm teaching an open ballet class in Europe for some decades now. I'm also fortunate to teach around the world, which is always a source of creative process and cultural references and interests that keep me alert. Some years ago, I traveled with ADF to Korea, and I remember that over dinner when the faculty got together, there was kind of a general complaint about the stiffness of the dancers and how they lack sensuality and they don't understand sex and so on. And we come and teach them how to. And that was bothersome to me, that was, felt like, that they actually trained dancers like, they just do it in a different way. Also, another complaint about them was that they're not musical, that they can't keep rhythm. And I remember that, I kind of realized that when they move across the floor, they're not together. They're somehow, and it's not bothering them. Somehow that's okay, So I asked them, how do they relate to the music? And they had different way of singing it inside, which was like totally satisfying to them. I thought, good for them, it's like they maybe teach me, how to sing. That is unusual for me.
This thing of, sorry, is Wendell Cooper. But I just wanted to kind of jump on this thing also when you go to a place and there's all this expectation.
Sorry.
I can't see your mouth, so
Oh.
then hearing you is even worse.
Cool. Yeah, thank you, Marjan. But I've had a similar request or expectation in China that I'm going to make everyone sexy. But this thing of expectation has really been one of the things that's been most mind-blowing, because I've gone to very odd or foreign places to teach, and not so much in Europe, but more like in China and in Russia and in Kenya a couple times. And I was able to go back to Nairobi like 3 times. And that experience in particular revealed how much I didn't know and how much I had taken for granted on those earlier trips, and how much I was kind of a colonizing kind of presence in my first trips there, and just thinking about, okay, I have this thing that I'm going to go do. I've been working on all these years, and it's going to be great. I'm going to go teach it. And I did that, and they were great at it, and that was great. Everything was great. And then I went back and I thought, let's try, instead of teaching repertory, just give a really simple prompt, see what happens. And I was at a festival of choreographers from different countries, like, a curated community. These were all choreographers in the room. They were almost all from different countries, and all had such different ideas. And it was like, my role, it just completely blew my mind about what I thought I was supposed to be doing in that and a lot of my other enterprises. And that said, also teaching in spaces like that, whether it's you're at a festival in China and people came from a whole other part of the country, to come to this workshop, and you're like, oh shit, okay, you've come like really, really far. And what does that mean? What did that mean for you to save that money and here, and what are you expecting for me to make you sexy? Or that, like in New York, I never really participated so much in the class culture, mainly because of coming from breakdancing, and it's a little bit suspect, the whole thing with classes, and like, you learn that in the class book? Because I think voguing looks different if you learn it in the class versus you learn it in the club, and there is a really, class, socioeconomic class. So that's definitely a thing that comes up,
But you teach at Hunter.
I do, yeah. And that, to kind of bring it full circle, it does, being in academia, it's a similar, often kind of racial spread to what you mentioned earlier, or even being a yoga teacher, or often like the higher you get into a lot of these educational spaces, the wider it gets. But also just thinking about, yeah, sure, that's fine. Actually relate to the people in the room, like Hunter, diverse group of students, for example. And not unique at Hunter, but you'll have like a hip hop class, or maybe 2 hip hop classes, 1 West African class, maybe 2, and then like 7 or 8 contemporary dance classes, or composition classes or improvisation classes that also kind of come from like this Eurocentric kind of Western aesthetic. But it just starts to me because I come first from breakdancing, but I was a bit too queer for that, I think. And then I started studying dance, so then it just started to get too weird for that space. So there's nowhere that's really offering the class that I'm trying to teach. And I find it's a lot race, class, like hip hop made it into the university because it's one of the more heteronormative of the urban dance things that could make it into. I'm sure there's a lot of issues around that, but so, I've been teaching contemporary dance in the university space and always trying to figure out, well, how much voguing do I put in, or how much of that to slide in there, and am I lying or am I not? But it's contemporary. Came after what we often think of contemporary, because we're really talking about modern modernism, and it gets really confusing.
Well, I think I don't know if it's confusing for us or it's confusing. And I don't think of it as confusing. I think of it as adding to the class. I'm Mia Love, and I teach. I've been teaching in the university about 21 years. And I for expression in the body. And then therefore, a little of that language. And I have, including 2015, a lack of sensibility about body. And what does that mean? And then how do we teach based on not just the people that frequent our class, because people that frequent our class are also the people that are hopefully thinking in those very globalized ways. Not just about how we're teaching, but about how their body is responding to the information globally. Other than expose ourselves to new cultures or other cultures beside the culture that we live in. And I turn in the continent and find that there's an opportunity. Well, first, when I teach in Africa specifically, even if it's in West Africa or East Africa, I'm teaching a lot of men. I'm not teaching as many women, or I'm not surrounded by women. Last year, I started having more women and I think Nora helped to bring that to a little bit to the forefront of women and power and politics and the real kind of sense of what the objectified African body looks like, what the Black female body looks like, its relationship to movement and how we teach. And so those kinds of conversations are now really very at the forefront of our conversation. And women, particularly in Africa, are standing very firmly inside of that space and are being really, voices are being really, really, really heard in the last, I would say, five years even. So I don't know if it's so confusing. Why, in that sense, I question. I'm saying to myself, do we need the word confusing? Because I think it adds to the sensibility of everything that we do, how we teach, who we look at, look at the room. I'm looking at all these faces. I don't see a lot of Black faces in here. And I Facebook this like several times. I put it out there, the people that tweeted and, and we're downtown dance. We still have the same sensibilities of downtown dance. It's of a continuation, historical separation in some way, not that we necessarily are doing it physically, but what's happening? And I'm not here to even really have questioning, like how do we all of these kind of transparencies that we're looking at, but then there's a gap. There's something not happening. There's a sensibility of a body, a couple of bodies being left out in the way that we teach. And I don't really know how to move through that other than what we continuously do. I'm talking about in America, although we may have these sensibilities and then we bring them back, we are asking them to get global in their perspective of body awareness, of body movement, of body sensibility. Yeah. Just wanted to cap on that.
So we're potting in that corner, a pot extension or something, but since you're going to the topic,
Economics.
Economics.
Sounds good. How would you consider the balance of a dancer's professional and personal life and consider the models of organizational support?
I cannot hear.
Consider current obstacles for both student and teacher. One of the things here, it says new structures for making class affordable. Well, my name is Jody, by the way. New structures for making class affordable, available, and convenient for dancers. Because I know Janet really has something to pinpoint on it. I'm gonna let you start, Janet. Is that okay?
It's fine.
We'll go off.
Try very hard. I was trying to bring the entire industry has no. In fact, it's ridiculous to talk about it as an industry. We know that. That said, it affects very separately from the rest of the world. And there are issues that you as younger people probably have to deal with. And issues that we had to deal with as middle. So one of things I've noticed in my 41 years of teaching professionally is that nothing trickles down to you. Nothing. There might be $5 million given partners last week, and we're happy, we're not unhappy. I'm deliriously happy, especially for the part that goes to hardness, because you're all going to need the physical therapy. It's not going to. Sometimes it can go to a choreographer, and you might get hired. I'm talking about the dancers, the lowest, what would be the lowest rung of our industry, and is in fact the backbone and the meat and potatoes of the entire thing. I sound like I'm crying. I'm not crying. I'm not crying. So, if I think about my teaching life, over 40 sometimes, yeah, I said the says I ever taught were $2.25. The studio, I know, it was 41 years ago. So the class cost $2.25. $5. And the I broke even. It wasn't hard. It didn't mean I was an enormous success. I had 5 people. Anyway. But it was possible. It's not really possible to be an independent teacher and just, hang a sign outside. It's not going to happen anymore. If I go beyond that and I go to having my own studio and 3 of them, they each got smaller and more. That's not going to happen anymore. You are either going to have to be, a mega studio, or you can't have these little choices that used to be around, like 9th Avenue and 10th Avenue. They had all these little studios you could go, and sometimes you found somebody you liked. So the choices are being cut back for you. Mind you, my pianist, I gave my pianist a raise. This pianist for 20 years. So 20 years ago, when I used this guy, he got paid the same thing I was paying him now. And I thought that wasn't fair. So I gave him a raise. But the economics of the whole thing is, of course, I make less money than I ever did. Ghana did a master class when I was like 25 or 26. I got paid more money than I have ever made working class. And now the way it's going is there are no studios to rent. Should you want to be an independent person, they're not even there, even if you're $1 an hour or $200 for those studios. They are either there for you to rent 6 hours a day because you're a Broadway show, right? Or they're given as not for an ongoing class that you can't do. You can go and rent for a month for some kind of special. You have to be part of a staff. You have to be part of a family. And the way that works is they take a percentage. That percentage has gone up over the years. And so has the price of class. So for instance, steps is something like $20. The teacher gets $9. The studio gets $11. The pianist comes off the top, so the teacher and the studio are both paying for the pianist off that. Then if they have graduating prices, like you give like 10 classes, that comes off the teacher. You're not going to have teachers. Who would go into this as a profession, I ask you?
So the incentive to teach is also
As a person. I mean, not unless you're your own money.
Exactly.
So it's not an option. And for many of you, it's not an option. You found other ways already. You just say, you know, you take the way you come in, that's brilliant. And you do that. I have found other ways. We have found other ways. You know, I go to Europe because I get paid at least double what I make here. And that sustains me. I got tired of going to Europe because I'm a and because the first time I went to France, I realized that I never had a teacher like me. I was like 34 years old, very pumped out. You know, they would have never let me teach a ballet class if I came from France. Even now they wouldn't, because actually I don't have their certification. So my idea about the economics, it's not a great idea. Maybe it's a great idea. It's at least an idea. Maybe you'll come up with something better. It's possible. My idea, the spaces have to start to be subsidized in the same way. Personal space, which wasn't always subsidized for choreographers. There was a time it wasn't, you know. But if the spaces for professional dance class can be subsidized, which is not different money, it's an allocation differently of the money, then the price of the studios can be down. The studios can make the money they need to make for paying real estate prices. But perhaps the teacher, the pianist can make a living wage, and the class price can stay reasonable. And if it doesn't, then there's a greed problem somewhere in the chain. But it's not going to be my greed problem, I can tell you that. I've offered classes for $15. I bring people from Europe. I pay for them to come from Europe. I pay for them to live here. And those classes are $18 for 2 hours, you know, $15 if you buy them for the week. They're as cheap as they can be, paying for the studio and all those things. So it's a way to invent people you can talk to, because this has to be changed through these big studios. Like, there has to be a demand from you that you can't pay more for class. It certainly can't go $20. I mean, and then of course when people paid $2.25, they came every day, right? And they did come every day. They came every day for years. And so
that was normal.
It was normal. That's how you train.
Culture of the 90s.
90s, the 80s, the 70s, all of that. That's how we train.
Yeah, and part of it was affordability, and part of it was research and interest, and it was a way of it was like your health. I mean, it was a way of getting your information and sharing, and
it was everything. It was
everything. It was your community. Yeah.
It was everything.
It was a no-brainer. It was what you did. It wasn't like, oh, should you? It was like, no. I mean, that was my experience, and I feel like so many of these people I'm looking at, we did that. That was the culture. That was. And did economics stop that, or is there a lack of importance on it now because of economics?
Or are the economics different?
Well, they are different, for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know. Honestly, people have given free class. People have given cheap class. Sometimes people don't. So there's also now a habit of not going to class. My class, people come to all the time, and they have for 40 years. I just don't know what to tell you about that. I'm opposite everybody else. I can't teach you that thing. That's all I do. I don't go in the bigger questions. I stay that thing, and from that thing, I think other things come. You know, but I don't play with a lot. I stay there. I think more people will come. At least from what I hear, people tell me they don't have money for
Did you have something more to add in?
I guess one of the things in this topic was, my name's Vicki Shape, and I
have taught for movement research a lot, and also I teach at Hunter College and have taught at other universities. And this economics topic was organizational. First of all, yes, it's a situation. Students can't afford classes, professional dancers, and teachers can't survive. So it's a global problem. No one can survive just from their dance work. And also there isn't enough dance work for this very sophisticated body of intelligent, this like sophisticated movers, sophisticated thinkers. There's not enough work. But I do think organizational support is very helpful. And the thing about movement research that I think is unique and different from institutions is I realize it's a volunteer-based place. Like there's no core curriculum. You don't have to teach this and that. And the individual going to the class, what they need, where they want to go, and their own advancement. And there is no advancement except your own individual advancement. And the order has to provide an array of offerings to make it viable and alive for a large community. That's what I'm.
We just want to make sure we are going to individual groups, and we are going to have time for other people to. We are going to have time to speak. So within 10 minutes, and then we'll move on to making sure everybody's
I'll start. Yeah, my name's Juliette Knapp, and I teach at movement research. I started taking classes in movement research when I first moved to New York. So that's an important part of my own history. I Hunter, and I currently teach at the news. There's a lot to piggyback on in the economic part, in the economic pod. There's a lot that filters into class that comes from that. And one thing I will say is that because people can't take class so frequently, I think that class has to do more for everybody because there's less time to be in an individual process that becomes something you return to, that you evolve through, that you discover yourself through your own commitments to coming to class every day in a way that's not economically stressful. It's not stressful on your time. I don't think that really exists unless you're independently wealthy. And so what I have as a teacher is that in terms of evolving structures in class, that there's more in a sense that I can do in class. There's more of an invitation for me to provide sort of a more expansive landscape that can be, in a sense, almost less specific. It can be more individual, and it can invite in, or maybe needs to invite more of that darkness, of that sort of mind. It's not about improving. It's not about getting better. About sort of listening to what it is to be a dancer. And I feel like as these sustainable structures sort of dissolve away, that my experience of taking class needs to be that I do take my own class. And my teacher, Elaine Summers, 89, she just died. I was talking to her a little while ago about teaching, and she said, the only way to teach is to take your own class. And I just thought that was such a brilliant thing for somebody who was sort of exiting, she was leaving. She was on her way out. And I would sometimes show up to class, and
frequently. And then, but she was there, you know, so it was just the two of us. And so who was taking class? Elaine and me. So I just offer that in terms of evolving structure, like that's has a lot of resonance to me, that it's about being in that process. It's not just like learning from teaching. So that the context, whatever we're dealing with in terms of structures and context, undergrad situation, graduate situation, open class, that those contexts don't so much construct what we feel like we have to do, but that we construct the context of what class does, and in our own little way, because the economics don't support what we do, sort of conjuring that as an act of service, which is something we don't talk about a lot, I think, in terms of class, but that I embrace and sort of see that as a context of what we do, students and teachers in service to the art of dance, of movement, which is, you know, who has that conversation? You know, where is there a chance to really embrace? And I think that that in some sense is what dance can do. So that's a long wrap up and pass on. Thoughts?
But that's a hard one to follow.
You want me to keep going?
Well, I mean, my name's John Beth, and I think definitely, like Beth, I share that same kind of feeling. I mean, I've spent the last 30 years. I've spent the last 30 years basically being, I would say, more a choreographer than anything else. That's kind of what I've spent my time doing. So it's interesting because I wrote down context in relationship to this, and it's quite beautiful, that idea that we have to, that Juliet's proposing about creating a context, not just accepting that context. But I also accept who I am, and how who I am and what I have to offer constantly shifting than that I'm in. And I don't know, you know, I teach a lot for movement research, or some for movement research, and that's gone on for many years. And I used to teach more internationally and rarely do of least in the last 3 years, and have increasingly taught in graduate and undergraduate programs domestically here in the United States. And so to just give a really, there are some situations, particularly in undergraduate education, where I'm very aware of, like, that there's a quite large ratio where there's not going to be professionals in the field. And that doesn't wildly change the situation, but I think it does shift it, because I think what that start to make me think about, well, what do I have to offer to a larger situation that is not necessarily discipline specific, but how does it resonate, and how is it valuable? Who are thinking about being practitioners in a professional way. Just even questioning, like, the viability of making a living in the field radically shifted, that I begin to wonder whether or not all of the models that I sort of like eked out a living disappearing for the current generation, and what does that mean about if it's going to survive, is going to need to take on a radically different identity that's partly economic, but in response to the economics that may be negative, that maybe there's a space of possibility. I'll freely admit, I can't quite figure out what that is, or what that looks like. I don't know that I have so much, I feel like I'm a bit rambling.
John, as she's speaking, I have this amazing image because our culture has such a moment for what? Personal trainers, life coaches. We know all of that. We can teach that. So isn't there a way that we can let class be a structure that invites other people to discover that they're dancers? When I had this flash on my own background, which is as Eurocentric as you can get. Ballet was my background, all school of training. In that, and at the beginning it was just once a week, I could go into that structure and I could find myself. I could be in my body. I could find my creativity. I could let my imagination come alive. I could refine a practice and understand details and differentiation, which is, the road to maturity. And it's interesting because I think about my Feldenkrais practice for the last 20 years. I started Feldenkrais. It was with this wonderful sense of release. Find that structure. Finally, I'm free of that seeming rigidity. But actually, Feldenkrais too is about differentiation in order to find. And so bringing that freedom within a structure, and now I feel like every workshop I give is freedom within form, right? Because I say, but within that, how does the individual find him or herself? How do we practice that noticing, the listening that we were talking about earlier, and let that be the practice? So that, Feldenkrais wrote a book, Body and Mature Behavior. That's what the world needs, mature behavior. So how do we practice with our embodied sense of living so that in my Feldenkrais practice, maybe I notice my behavior, maybe I notice a moment of aggression, a moment of passivity. Whatever it may be, I can observe my relationship with the world and help others to do the same thing so that we can relate honestly with one another. Sorry, I just feel like I'm on a soapbox, but I'll get off it. But thank you. Yeah.
Please say your name.
I'm sorry, Barbara Forbes. Thank you.
This just makes me think, like, there are people, dance is happening, right? This came up in a conference that Beth and John and I went to about people coming into undergraduate situations who have had a lot of experience with competition dance. And that's where a lot of energy is going right now. That's what a lot of people, like these studios that maybe some of us grew up going to. I am from Wisconsin, and the studios that I grew up in, Wisconsin. But those studios now that, had very, clear Vaganova technique are now doing very clear competition dance. And I see the enthusiasm, and I see the rigor, and I see the community, and I see the investment, and it's exciting. And it seems like it's really far away, from what we do. But I think if we take the opportunity as teachers to kind of let that information come to us, read our own sort of rebellious history within dance and see what that's like let that rebellion kind of come into our classroom and work with the messiness of that. I think there may be potential economically to build a sense of this is what dance is, it's worth investing in, expanding it out into the larger culture, creating a language.
A little problem. There is money in that sector.
In what?
That sector.
Yeah,
There's a lot of money right there. So,
anyway, it's just a thought in terms of what we do, like the act of class, taking class, giving class, receiving, and how I believe that we need to take a certain responsibility for what's out there and not just be, chagrin, whatever, full of resentment for the current state of affairs.
Just like to, sorry to wrap up.
Sure. Just, yes. No, I'm not, I don't mean to, I'm talking about for myself, so I'm not putting that.
just off the top of my head, so I'm teaching a melt workshop right now. It's Alexander technique, and I feel like 5 days is nothing. So I have this sort of, on the one hand, the means that I have for switching hats all the time. I'm teaching Alexander technique. I'm teaching Trisha Brown. I'm doing my own work. I'm teaching shipbuilders. I'm teaching dancers. The first act that I want to do is listen. So I walk into a room and I ask everyone else to speak first, so that the class is a Socratic format. And at the same time, I have 5 days, 2 hours each day. I feel like the class that I'm teaching here at Melt, I'm just talking as much as I can to plant as many little seeds as possible, because I won't see these people again, or I might not see these people again. So it's this funny pressure to sort of spit out the information that I can, and at the same time listen in this short period of time. The thought I had was my own personal arc doesn't include so much class. I started dancing very late, and when I joined Trisha Brown Company, I too stopped taking class. And as I advance in age too, I crave community, and community is actually what I'm using as a technical tool. That when I see someone, my system works differently than when I go internally trying to feel myself. So actually, technically, using other people for my support system. So just very briefly, not competitively, but I really miss those days of, wow, her leg went like that, or he did that amazing thing. Can I try and do that amazing thing? Because I'm not in the room by myself. I'm inspired by other people, and I can also use you to open my back or whatever to remind me to expand and integrate. So that's how I.
We really bit off a lot. So we'd like to just invite, firstly, it's like 10 minutes for anybody. So whoever hasn't spoken, and then we'd like to invite everybody here to 1-minute responses. So we could exchange in case you have something to add.
We should open.
Okay. Can I start?
Which side are you on? It's so good.
Yeah. Anybody can chime in, just keep it short. Well, Barbara said something I just had to respond to. I mean, I think what we know, we don't even know yet, is ground zero, and everybody should be getting it. Everybody should be sucking in what we have now. We just don't know how to get that right yet.
I've just got a little commission to write for this like sci-fi newspaper that reports on something happening in one's field of expertise 7 years from now. And I had this like vision of people embracing a kind of the sort of feeling that belonged to maybe the early 20th century of like the importance to humanity of, you know, movement as the ground of being, and sort of thinking of all of this in terms of public structures of Asia, but this sort of visualizing, like creating new public spaces where these things, you know, this class can be offered or in concentric circles around our small community. But I have to say, I spent 4 years away from New York, and after having not taken class for like 10 years, I was like, oh, I can't get out of bed, or I'm too poor, I've got other things to do. You know, the second I moved away, I was like, I just want to roll around on the floor with other people who like to do that. And the value of our smallness also has, you know, there's value to the smallness as well. But I was just imagining a reinvigoration of a kind of utopian ideal that belonged to the, you know, some of the histories of dance that we are, you know, are still passing through. Exciting.
I think there's also just still like a kind of weird compartmental, of like you know, like the competition, like the way in which it just seems of odd. I feel like at U Arts, for example, most of the students I think come out of competition studios, and what's interesting in how that system is, the way that Dante Birchfield, who directs that program, is kind of it's sort of going like this, right? So that you circulate between all of it as a student. And it's no longer like, I'm going to graduate and be a jazz dancer, and I'm moving to, like, I'm going on a cruise ship, and then I'm going to have my own studio. It's like, I'm going to work on a cruise ship, and then I'm going to make my own work as a performance artist here, and then I'm going to, do community service. It's like, it starts to spill out in a lot of directions at once. Like, I feel like there's an opportunity in a way that there's more. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it's inside, like I think, it's inside this thing that I think is really hard because it's hard to teach like a lot. It's confusing and messy, and I'm not being clear, but it's like it's not like organized. I mean, what people need to learn. It's it distributes in a lot of different directions, I think.
Jesse, I'm listening to what you're saying, and it's helping me to refine my thoughts. I bumped up against a place when I heard something about competition in dance and there being money there, and and something about larger culture. And it was interesting to me because I was thinking, well, just like it's often like places where there's a lot of money is not necessarily the larger culture, but it's treated as a larger culture, like institutionally. And I think about, because artists are spilling out into all these directions with our work, that's not exactly what's being taught though in academia. Like, it's not like all of those different directions are on the same platform. Just like you were saying, Wendell, like there's 7 modern contemporary classes, like 1 West African class, 1 hip hop class, 1 something, you know what I mean? Like maybe 1 somatic class of some sort. But the truth of the matter is that in our professional practice, I might go to Bikram and maybe a West African class, or I'm really checking out this Tai Chi class, and I'm practicing some community organizing, creative embodiment practices here. And those are the things that I think I could have really benefited from learning in college, so that I could get an early practice in them. And I feel like part of where I feel like the liberation can happen is in education, or what I'm saying, the revolution, where I feel like the revolution could happen is in us pushing up against curriculum and institution and organization around what it is that can be offered. Like, KJ is teaching one thing, and Janet is teaching her thing, and Speed is teaching his thing, and we're all teaching these things, and they have equal value, versus ballet is the thing. You take your ballet first, and then you take your contemporary, and then you take an elective class, which is really what a lot of training, dance training in the academies, which is really what it's like. And that I think is also what's affecting the trickle down of the monies to.
Yeah, and I want to add to this, because I just curated
I cannot hear.
Yeah, I would just want to add to this, because when we curated Rebecca, the classes for the last Libre research, we did something that was never proposed. We proposed classes that were never proposed, and it was completely sold out. We made a budget. We counted 6 people, and we were like, if we have 6 people, it's going to be okay. And it was completely sold out. So I think what you say is very important, is that just go against expectations, and I think people are really hungry. That's and it raises other problems for sure, but we can't solve everything at once.
But I don't think anybody's saying that there isn't an interest in all kinds of movement form. There is. And there's probably the curriculums in some of the schools have to get up in those things. But there's definitely an interest in all kinds of movement. That's not it. It's how is it going to? Personally, I'm speaking about New York, because I consider New York to be the cultural capital of the country. And I'm interested in it staying a cultural capital. So I'm interested in knowing what we can do here to have more choices, as I said, not less choices, but more choices of independent, possibility.
I think Janet raises a great point of just advocating for subsidized rates for class. I think that would really shift things and allow more spaces to open up. But what I'm interested in, and just anybody, we're sitting in Gibney, and Gibney just got their new space downtown and has hosted Movement Research and several others. So has that been a good influence? Is this kind of center and Gibney, I mean, how has that effect been happening, and is it something that we then can pursue and build on, or how could it be better, or anybody's response to just the two new spaces, this space and the new space downtown, in terms of creating some kind of new energy for classes?
Melanie and I are teaching there.
Well, I have it just on the concentric circles, and Gina, I'm teaching at one of the spaces there, and it feels like it's doing something in the concentric way. There seems to be different people in class, more audience, different kind of coming together of not the roll down on the floor only community. And so they're just using our
But I prefer the term
freaky deaky, not just but also it's therefore losing something that is people are missing to come to a consistent class for practice and community. There's more of a drop-in feeling in that place. So it doesn't have to be one or the other, but I feel we still need a space, and it might be a physical space where that is invited with regularity outside of the economic and all these other problems, a space where it's invited to come, somebody's smaller space or somebody's space where there can be a moment of breathing after the class is done before you have to run out and the next people come in, just something where we all want to come and practice, maybe in the center of this concentricness where it can then open up and it doesn't have to be a struggle against those two, that can actually support each other. So.
I don't know if I can put it all together. I'm trying to do it really quickly, but I think totally there's this how the structure of the class operates. The more aspects of humanity inside of the class. And then a couple of people talked about community. And I'm just thinking, I mean, like I don't know, we live in New York City, and I still don't have a sense of real community. Like what does that really mean? Like what does that invite? As we continue to investigate what our classes ask for or what our classes open up to, the sensibility of and the curriculum in the undergirding and the underbelly of the way that we decide to teach, who we teach, how we teach. What is that community? How do we access different aspects of community? And it's so hugely a part of economics, so hugely a part of the industrialization of thinking and the notion of imperialistic kind of conversations that keep getting braided in these really deep constructs. And so how do we serve humanity? How do we look at a new construct of teaching, which is why when I was asked to come and be a part of all of what we're all talking about, and I thought, wow, I have so many questions about even the concept of all of us teaching, like how do we interlace our own concepts collectively, other than at these moments that we never, that we're always rushing to try to figure out, but that we never have these kinds of panels. I mean, not that we never had the panels, we definitely have that, and here we are. But I mean, that the solidarity, the discourse, the continuation of discourse, and we really get to dismantle this notion of how do we teach? What does it mean? Who comes in? What are we accessing? Yes, it gets messy, but isn't that what art is? To get messy and try to figure it out? I mean, I don't know, Jesse, you and I have taught at ADF, and I've seen the messiness of class and how powerful it is, just in general. And then all of a sudden we start teaching, and then it gets really clean. You know, I don't know. I just whatever that means. Yeah.
Well, I do think because there's so many studios here, this is great. It's kind of great that there is a place where you at least run into people you know you haven't seen, even if it's you're not going to sit down and have lunch with them. But personally, I feel that you have to make your own community. They have to be smaller. You have to have more discourse. I mean, I don't know if you're doing this. When I was a young dancer, we always went out for coffee afterwards. Every week. It was the fun. Okay, later.
I want to make really quick. There's a studio that some of us have taught in Milan. It's a small private studio, and it's a lot of lower down on the floor. But they make all their money from the non-dancer classes.
What?
The non-dancer classes. They have this class every night, and people come after work, and it is genius. And that's community.
That's what it is. No,
And the studio makes all the money from the non-dancer classes.
That's what every studio has always done. All three of my studios had non-dancer martial arts, which was everything. There was every kind of what I got in trouble for calling it hobby dancing. But whoa. But those, because those were evenings, those were people who came from work. Those were always charged more. And they always supported the other students. Even when I was young and I taught at City Center, I remember the woman who ran that saying that my class didn't bring in money, but she had tap classes for that. So there's always been other kinds of classes. That wasn't just a lot.
But I think what you said about subsidize is very important because sometimes you shave a lot of money for choreographers and there is a demand. You should ask them for education.
Well,
I wonder also though for younger, I don't know, like for my generation, I feel like, and maybe it's part of, there are bigger economic shifts in New York that make it more difficult to take class, and I feel like I'm always moving somewhere when there's like a big economic, overturn or something. But I feel like it sounds like there's this thing of sorting between like community formation and economy and charging people money for stuff, and how we're trying to build community by charging people money, and it's like, oh no! Yeah. But so it requires this like really, really, really refined level of worship, and that's okay. It's not just that you're going to even be able to get some classes, and besides having to be your own marketing major and light up and doing all that, that's not even it. Like, yes, you have to have your side hustle and your side hustle. Like those all have to be also like making you a healthy person, and I think that's a really difficult conversation because it also requires us to interrogate more about what we do, how we call what we do, how we present that work, and this thing Jesse you were saying about like how we're always so in these different spaces. It's like I think the revolution can start a lot with who's just. Like you're saying, what actually gets on the bill and how open do we let that be? How much do we let the teacher actually say what they're going to do and not have to, and I'm going to get to do my thing in this kind of other way. We called it jazz, or whatever,
But it takes a real difference between movement research and institutional. I feel like it's a huge difference. Like movement research is not checking up on teachers, and I said this before, there's no curriculum, there's no this, it's a volunteer, you go to where you want to, what you think you
There's a kind of cultural space though that there's a kind of
it's a very specific cultural space that a lot of people do not.
But it's so different from institutions.
I also just want to begin, like, it's such a good point, it's such an interesting point, but I'm not an entrepreneur. You know, like I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm not interested
Yeah.
in capitalism. I'm against. You know, like
Yeah.
it's just don't get me started. I'm not saying that that's what you're suggesting, but just sort of like to embrace that part of it too. That's like not just about like here's my website, my classes are up there. Like I really have thought about this a lot. I don't have any answer, but
Yeah.
somehow harnessing that energy that I think is plays some kind of role in our field.
I think
You
somehow
know,
like,
we're
wonder
in
if, like,
that.
the anti-capitalism thing also though is a kind of leftover of the studio art. Not that they're the same, like that art should somehow be separate from kind of monetary exchange.
Well, a lot of people now are talking about post-capitalism and the disappearance of money. And we're existing it from a place where money is the signifier of value right now. So how are we changing that?
Okay, not to make it really mundane, sorry. Not to shut it down, because no, this is totally exciting. Now I realize we can have 5 more hours of conversation. The elevator is going to stop working in 5 minutes. I just want to make sure anyone who needs the elevator can use it. And I think we should just let the space be like, we can let go of the panel and just, let the energy of these conversations kind of move on in a less formal way. Our thoughts on there, it will really help us in terms of what's percolated or resonated for you guys and for you guys in terms of how we can think about harnessing these conversations moving forward. Because there's about 20 different studies projects in here, at least, for further conversations. Thank you. Thank you very much.
It looks like a lot of people wrote down. Is there a place that people could say, oh,
There,
email
me. Everybody's info at research.org.
Yeah.
I I don't know how
Anyway.